On the night my parents were kidnapped, my police officer brother was going to accompany the fake heiress for bungee jumping. I didn't stop him. I decisively called the police and prepared the ransom. In my previous life, my brother didn't accompany the fake rich heiress because he was saving our parents. As a result, during her bungee jump, the rope snapped and she plunged into the cliffside abyss. Her body never recovered. Afterwards, my brother stayed completely silent. On my birthday, he drugged me and took me to that exact cliff. It was you who orchestrated the kidnapping. You schemed for their affection to this extent. You're a demon. Emma is dead, and you don't deserve to live either. When I opened my eyes again, I had returned to the night my parents were kidnapped. This time, my brother didn't launch the rescue operation, but instead rushed straight to the adopted daughter. But later, he regretted it so much that he nearly went mad. I jolted awake, my forehead slick with sweat. My heart pounded wildly in my chest, as if it were about to burst through. The lingering dread of free fall clung to me as the familiar room decor came into view. I checked the time. I had been reborn. I was reborn on the day my parents were kidnapped. In 5 minutes, the kidnappers will call, demanding that we prepare the ransom within an hour, or they will kill the hostages. I am the Bai family's daughter who had been missing for 18 years. Having been back in my parents' arms for less than a year, I considered them my everything. No matter what, I wouldn't let the tragedy from my previous life happen again. I quickly went downstairs to wait by the phone, followed closely by my police officer brother in tactical gear and casual pants. Rita, why are you acting so nervous? Who's this performance for? Mom and Dad aren't even here. Weren't they kidnapped by you? Bay Jack curled his lips in a mocking smile. At that moment, I was certain he had also been reborn. His expression seemed to say, "Stop struggling, it's useless." Without our parents, the scene we're acting out would end even sooner. In my last life, my brother was convinced that I had meticulously planned the kidnapping to vie for attention and gain our parents' focus. I didn't know where he got that absurd conclusion from. In this life, my brother decided to ignore my trap entirely. Rita, don't blame me for not warning you. Instigating a crime is itself a crime. When you get caught, don't cry and beg me to bail you out. I wanted to say something, but the urgent phone ringing cut me off as soon as I opened my mouth. Each ring felt like a needle piercing my heart. But my brother pretended not to hear it at all. Before leaving, a trace of disdain flashed across his brows. Do whatever you want. I'm going to accompany Emma on her bungee jump. Anyway, they won't really get hurt. Don't bother me when it's not necessary. He didn't say this in my previous life. Using his years of accumulated criminal investigation expertise, my brother swiftly pinpointed the kidnappers' hideout. Within just an hour, he brought our parents back completely unharmed. That day, my entire being was consumed with tending to our traumatized parents, utterly failing to notice the veiled mistrust and fury smoldering beneath my brother's gaze. Later, when he tied me to the cliff's edge, I finally understood the truth. During the rescue mission, the pseudo-heiress Bay Emma bombarded him with endless calls. My brother didn't answer her calls, so she went bungee jumping alone and had an accident. At this moment, the phone ringing pierced like a death knell, sending waves of visceral dread coursing through my body. I answered, and the kidnapper's voice came through with chilling clarity. 20 million, prepared within 2 hours, or your parents die. I stared in horror. What? In my previous life, wasn't it clearly only 10 million? I tightly gripped the receiver, cold sweat dripping down my face. It seemed that the realities of both worlds were slightly different. The kidnapper's location may have changed. Originally full of confidence, I was suddenly overwhelmed with panic. With a tearful plea, I begged, "Can you give me a little more time?" They hung up immediately. I abruptly reined in my emotions, knowing that showing vulnerability to these desperados would gain me nothing. The immediate priority was to prepare the ransom and confirm their location. I quickly wrote down the information I knew from my previous incarnation on a piece of paper. There were 2 kidnappers, both young men, and the kidnapping occurred at the residence of one of them. The ransom of $10 million was to be deposited in the third trash bin at the south entrance of the train station. Before the kidnappers could retrieve the ransom, my brother had already stormed their den, securing both the money and our parents' safety. At this thought, I immediately picked up the phone and dialed 110. I also contacted my father's good friend Leo, a shareholder in the company, and had him instruct the finance department to withdraw the cash immediately. Leo was as panicked as I was on the phone. "Call the police, Rita. I'll take care of the money." Finally, a sliver of relief steadied my heart. 2 minutes later, officers from the local police precinct arrived. My brother's colleague and close friend David entered with an unpleasant expression from the moment he stepped through the door. "Rita, your brother just called me." Luckily, I was in the vicinity. Filing a false police report is a criminal offense. All my courage and hope shattered at that moment. Jack believed I was the mastermind behind the kidnapping, so he deliberately dispatched his close comrade to handle the police response. His intention was to stop my unreasonable outburst. Without police force or a criminal investigation expert to determine the location, how could I resolve the situation? Unable to hold back my emotions, I crumpled the clues in my hands. The thought of my parents being tortured by the kidnappers made me completely break down and burst into tears. "Brother David, I'm not lying. I'm an adult, and I take full responsibility for my actions. Please, I need the police's help. I need you to help me rescue my parents." I cried breathlessly, continuously checking the clock. Nearly 10 minutes had passed, and there wasn't much time left for me. David leaned against the sofa, scrolling through his phone nonchalantly. Seeing me cry, he displayed not a trace of compassion. They say kids raised in orphanages are very cunning. Do you think crying can emotionally blackmail others? Your brother is right. Those not raised from a young age just won't do. Their hearts aren't aligned. Emma is much more sensible than you. Emma shared my fate, but not my fortune. She was adopted by my parents at 8 and was raised like a precious gem. Especially our brother, who harbored an almost pathological thoroughness in his care for her. Even after both of them became adults, they still often slept together. The ticking clock pulled me back to reality. I forced myself to suppress the surging emotions and calm down. "David." I solemnly called his name. "Since you've been dispatched, you have an obligation to address my report." Before I could finish speaking, David cut me off with a mocking, merciless laugh. "You little brat. What are you pretending to be so high and mighty for here? Do you think returning to the Bai family grants you control over everything? In this family, you'll always remain an outsider." His words sent me plunging into an icy abyss. "Your brother told me that your parents don't love you that much. They often confuse your name with Emma's. You schemed a lot at home to vie for attention, forcing Emma to move out." David mindlessly munched on fruit from a platter he was holding while disparaging me. I knew these words weren't baseless. They had been instilled in him over time by my own brother. In their eyes, I was nothing but a scheming girl vying for attention. I stood in front of him again. His perception of me held no importance. "What will it take for you to believe me? My parents are in grave danger right now. Missing the golden rescue window. Can you shoulder the responsibility for that?" David froze mid-movement and rose from the sofa. "Then report me. A little girl like you deserves a lesson." Before he could finish, 2 uniformed police officers appeared at the doorway. "Is Rita here? We received a report and are here to handle the case." My legs went weak and I nearly collapsed to the ground. My parents were finally going to be saved. As soon as the officers arrived, David immediately went over to shake hands with them. "We're all colleagues here. I'm here to see Jack's sister." It was only then that I noticed David was in plain clothes. He rushed to the door and tried to bolt away in a flash. But the 2 police officers abruptly intercepted him at the door. I stepped forward to report the current emergency situation. "Officers, my parents have really been kidnapped. I have a recording." The call I had deliberately recorded on my phone finally proved useful. When the kidnapper's voice played, David's face turned pale with fear. Jack clearly said they were actors. He said you orchestrated all of this yourself. I snorted coldly. Couldn't be bothered to argue with him. I slowly unfolded the crumpled piece of paper in my hand. Relying on the somewhat blurry fragments of memories from my previous incarnation, I carefully recalled those minor details. Quickly piecing together the fragmented memories in my mind, I finally thought of a convincing explanation that could directly provide clues from my previous life. Officers, I can provide information about the suspects. They were spotted near my residence. They sound very similar. They asked me for directions back then. I can't be completely certain. Soon a sketch artist and listening equipment were in place. I focused intently on describing the physical features of the two kidnappers. After cross-referencing them with individuals who had prior criminal records, a match was quickly identified. They were two teenagers who had prior robbery convictions. One of them had rented an apartment under his real name, prompting the police to immediately organize a rescue operation. I sat on the sofa, my whole body feeling as if I'd just been hauled out of a pool. Cold sweat drenched me completely. 20 minutes later, the police officer accompanying me received an update. "I'm sorry, Rita. We didn't find your parents at the scene. But we found this." At the kidnapper's home, there were many covertly taken photos, including not only those of my parents but also of me. They've been casing the area for a long time. Don't worry, these two won't escape. My mind was on the verge of exploding. The worst fear I had dreaded had finally come true. The kidnappers had moved the hostages to a new location. This meant that all my clues were now useless. David was nearby, calling my brother. Even though he tried to lower his voice, I could hear every word clearly. "It's really a kidnapping. We've identified the suspects. You need to come back now." On Jack's end, he burst into hearty laughter. His words seemed deliberately meant for me to hear. "Stop it. The more you escalate this, the harder you'll fall. When the time comes and your parents lose face disowning you, don't you dare cry." Fear and resentment for my past life instantly flooded through me. Even though he hated me, his own sister whom he had only recently been reunited with. At times like this, one shouldn't even dismiss what others say. I was not at fault, and neither were my parents. They had lovingly raised their son for over 2 decades, yet now, to accompany a phony heiress, he was jeopardizing their safety. If my parents knew, I can't imagine how deeply hurt they would feel. I felt it was unjust for them. As I wiped the tears from my eyes, the home landline suddenly rang out loudly. The officer in charge of monitoring signaled me with a look. My heart suddenly raced. The kidnappers called again. The officer in charge of monitoring flashed me an okay hand sign. My entire body trembled as I picked up the phone. A nearby officer prompted me with a paper card. "Buy time." I immediately took a deep breath, but my voice still trembled with a sob as I spoke. "I'm getting the money ready. Please, I beg you, don't hurt my parents." On the other end, the kidnapper let out a disdainful laugh before responding. "Then hurry up. You have 1 hour. I said when the time comes, I'll kill the hostages." Another officer handed me a cue card. Where should the prepared money be delivered? And where do I retrieve my parents after the payment is made? The kidnapper's tone was clearly impatient. "Send the money to the lockers inside the station. Don't worry about your parents. As soon as the money's there, they'll be back with you right away." My temples throbbed violently, and the ransom drop location differed from the previous timeline. I tried to keep talking to assist the monitoring officers in tracing the source. "Are my parents all right? Can I hear their voices?" The kidnapper spat viciously and cursed. So many goddamn requests. Immediately, I heard my parents' helpless voices come through. "Rita, Daddy and Mommy have found you. We have no regrets in our lives. Don't risk yourself for us. Protect yourself. Mom wants to tell you that we love you more than you could ever imagine and want to make up for everything. It's just that sometimes we don't know how to express ourselves." My father's aged voice came through. "Sweetie, Daddy deeply regrets losing you when you were 2. If given the chance, I would apologize to you face to face." When I tried to speak, I choked, unable to form a complete sentence. I wanted to say I didn't need their redemption. I just wanted them safe. "Please wait patiently. I will rescue them without fail." The kidnapper cut off the conversation first. He lashed out with a kick at someone while spewing foul language. "You old bastard. Too much nonsense. Rich people are so damn dramatic. Hurry up and send the money, or I can't guarantee whether your parents will return home in one piece." After saying that, he hung up. Everyone instinctively turned to look at me, then shook their heads in unison. The location couldn't be pinpointed because the kidnappers used technology to block the signal. My anxiety and fear surged once again. My mind was a chaotic whirl of countless thoughts. This money must be delivered to at least ensure my parents remain safe. I immediately took out my phone and called Uncle Chin. He had promised to help me gather the cash. But no matter how many times I tried to call, the call simply wouldn't go through. As I was dialing that number for the nth time, my phone rang first. My brother Jack's laughter came through clearly. "Enough with the act. It's time to end this." I immediately grew alert. "What did you tell Leo?" Jack laughed openly. "Of course, I told him not to give you the money. That's 20 million. Even if it's all an act, he wouldn't hand it over so easily. I told Uncle Chin that you're just scheming. The moment you return to the Bai family, you try to drain all the assets. He won't bother with you." At that moment, all my hopes were utterly dashed. I felt like a deflated balloon, completely losing the will to live. Without those 20 million, there was not a shred of possibility that my parents could survive. I reviewed the case report from my previous life. Those two men already had blood on their hands. Naturally, they didn't care about two more. If the money isn't delivered, they'll actually kill the hostages. The phone rang again, and the kidnapper's impatient voice stabbed my heart like a sharpened dagger. "If you don't send the money now, I'll kill the hostages immediately." Invisible hands gripped my heart. Beads of sweat rolled down my forehead like raindrops. The ticking of the clock pounded against my heart with each beat. I took the paper card with trembling lips. "There's still time. We're withdrawing cash from multiple banks." "You're asking for too much. We have to hit multiple banks." The kidnapper laughed disdainfully. "The Bai family runs such a massive business empire, yet can't even produce this amount of cash." I was too nervous to dare make a sound. In those brief seconds, I abruptly detected a familiar train whistle resonating through the background noise. The surveillance officer also noticed and signaled that I needed to stall for time. "Let me hear their voices again. I need to confirm they're safe." The kidnapper's fury became palpable. "Do you really think you're some heiress? Expect everyone to coddle you. You have 30 minutes left. If we don't get the money, you'll never see your parents again." The call was disconnected, and the remaining time was cut short to 30 minutes. As expected, it was impossible to reason with the kidnappers. Everything around me was in chaos as eager police officers helped me contact banks to quickly secure the cash. I clenched my lips tightly, shut my eyes, and focused on reconstructing that split second before the call disconnected. I was certain I heard it, those brief 2 seconds of corridor wind that wailed like a spectral howl. I immediately seized the surveillance officer beside me. "Replay the last few seconds of the recording now." Everyone was startled by my abrupt action, but still complied with replaying the recording. Then, they too heard the ghostly howling wind that emerged at the call's conclusion. I shot to my feet. I know where my parents are. At first, the police officers were hesitant to believe me. After I presented concrete evidence, they immediately dispatched a team to the scene. The orphanage where I lived for 10 years was located next to an abandoned factory on the outskirts of a city. Trains hauling coal or timber passed through there every day. The first departure was at 6:10 a.m., followed by 10:30 a.m., with the last one at 8:30 p.m. The time deviation did not exceed 10 minutes. After verification by the police, the time points I provided matched exactly. I was even more familiar with that abandoned factory. Every day that we could go out to play, my friends and I would head there first. The factory was surrounded by concrete walls, yet there were 2 gaping holes penetrating completely through both the northern and southern walls. Every time a train passed by, the undulating wind, akin to vengeful spirits, seemed capable of tearing a person's soul from their very body. My friends and I would scream excitedly and run against the wind. That was almost the only joy of my childhood. So, I was absolutely certain that the kidnappers must be there. Rita just wait at home. Don't worry, we will definitely bring your parents back. I trusted the police's capabilities, but I had to see my parents immediately. Otherwise, even if I stayed at home, I would be on edge with every passing minute, each second an agony. Officers, please let me come with you. My parents and I were only recently reunited, and I truly can't bear to be separated from them again. Dad, you're okay now. You really scared me to death. These two were quite skilled at pretending to be filial children. Emma even conjured up tears on the spot. Unfortunately, my dad was sober, as if he'd gotten a brand new brain, waving his hand. Everyone sit down. Stop crowding around me and making such a racket. Both of them froze. In the past, my father would have been moved to tears by now, performing a heartwarming act of paternal affection and filial devotion. Now he remained as calm as a detached observer. I stepped forward and poured a glass of warm water for my dad. He took it to moisten his throat, and his expression softened noticeably. You all know what happened yesterday. If it weren't for Rita, I might not have survived. My mom immediately wrapped her arms around my shoulders, and I patted her comfortingly. It's all right. Everything has passed now. My brother immediately jumped in to refute. She was just answering the phone and buying time. Anybody with a mouth could have done that. My father's face clouded over with displeasure again. Where were you during my kidnapping? What exactly did you do? Jack was left speechless. Emma, showing no sense of propriety, jumped in.
Dad.
I was trying to rush back, but it was all because Jack kept insisting that you were under heaven's protection and everything would be fine. Saying such things at this moment was like stepping on a landmine. Only someone who had experienced kidnapping would understand that it was truly a life and death situation. Jack opened his mouth to explain. I thought Rita was putting on an act. She always loves competing for attention with Emma. I thought she was trying to trick me into coming home. In this rebirth, Jack's misunderstanding of me remained as profound as ever. He has always believed I was deceiving him. I saw my dad's eyebrows knit together. He exuded a commanding presence without anger. Who would risk their parents' lives as a joke, Jack? Do you think Rita is as irresponsible as you are? You two have been bullying her all along, yet she endured it just to spare us from worry. When will you finally understand your sister's painstaking devotion? When Jack heard the word sister, it was as if an internal switch had been triggered. He sprang to his feet. My only sister is Emma. The next second, a crisp slap struck his cheek. My mother, with long-suppressed fury, silenced the entire room. Then you and her can get out of the family together. My brother was utterly stunned by the slap and only regained his senses after a long while. Mom, what are you talking about? I'm your biological son. My mom's gaze pierced straight into the depths of Jack's soul. So, what if you're my biological son? What were you doing when it mattered most? You were off gallivanting with your sister. Do you have any idea how close Dad and I came to dying? After saying this, my mom was so overwhelmed she could barely breathe. I held her up, patting her back until she gradually caught her breath. You've been given the house, and having raised you for all these years, we expect nothing in return. Emma, from now on, keep your distance from the Bay family. After speaking, my mom was the first to burst into tears. I knew she must have turned this decision over in her heart 1,000 times. Jack looked helplessly at my dad, receiving only an angry glare.
Dad.
Emma was raised by you and Mom. How could an outsider, some wild seed that grew up elsewhere, ever replace Emma? Jack was too agitated. By the time he realized he'd misspoken and inadvertently cursed at our parents, it was already too late. My dad looked at him with eyes filled with disappointment. You've always been rebellious and willful since childhood. We sent you to the police academy to temper you, believing you would mature, but you only grew more corrupt. As soon as my dad spoke, Jack trembled completely. His face was filled with fear and remorse. He must not have expected that both kidnappings across 2 lifetimes had been real. Originally, he wanted to witness my humiliation, watch me being exposed and scolded by our parents, or get arrested for filing a false police report. This would somehow offset the hatred from Emma's fall off the cliff. Now everything was ruined, and Jack had completely lost his former arrogance. Instead, he pretended to be pitiful and apologized to our parents. Dad and Mom, I was wrong. It was truly unintentional. My dad cut him off. All you wanted was for Rita to leave the Bai family so you and Emma could carry on your affair under a legitimate pretext. What you fear most is losing your status and affection to Rita. Jack was utterly stupefied. His inner thoughts were fully exposed, as if stripped naked before everyone. Don't think I don't know about that little affair between you and Emma. Even if you aren't blood-related, it's still morally corrupt. It turned out Dad had known everything all along. The relationship between a son and an adopted daughter, if exposed, would bring shame upon the entire family. Emma and I are mutually in love, a match made in heaven. Jack continued to argue obstinately, watching as my dad's anger continued to rise. I hurried over to adjust the 4-drip rate for him. Dad, please calm down. The doctor said you mustn't get agitated. My dad patted my hand. With a loving gaze at me, his words were directed at Jack. The one who owes the biggest apology is Rita. Did you think I was ignorant about that incident 18 years ago? I felt as if I were frozen, startled by a sudden thought that arose in my mind. Jack was also scared. His lips quivered slightly, and his breathing grew rapid. My dad sighed heavily and pulled me into his arms, while my mom was already sobbing softly. Rita, you are not a child that Mom and Dad abandoned, nor are you the mischievous one who wandered off. You were intentionally abandoned by your brother when he took you out. My mom's sobbing was heartrending. After you came into our lives, your brother has been relentlessly competing for affection. He resents how much attention we've given you. It's all Dad and Mom's fault. We had to let him take you that day because we had something to attend to. It was our negligence. My face turned deathly pale in an instant. The truth detonated like a bomb right in the softest part of my heart. Before, I still felt a trace of guilt regarding Jack's self-reproach, but now it had been utterly swept away. Jack lowered his head and suddenly burst into laughter. So you all knew, huh? Ha ha ha. After all these years, this matter has finally come to light. I just hate how she's always clinging to you. She's just a brat who understands nothing. She was abandoned at the street corner in a flash when I turned away. My fury was like a ferocious beast. I almost charged at Jack in an instant, roaring at him. I didn't know anything back then. What right did you have to decide whether I stayed or left? Emma desperately blocked me, still making excuses for him. He was just a kid. Who would hold a child accountable for mistakes? Don't be so melodramatic. Jack was already 10 years old at that time. He wasn't ignorant. It was pure malice. He didn't want another person to take away the affection. By the time Emma came, he was nearly an adult. My mother held me close as I teetered on the verge of emotional collapse. Sweetheart, all of this is in the past. We will never be apart from you again. Seeing me so distressed, my father's inner fury surged in tandem. These are the facts as they are. Your mom and I have decided that after we pass away, all of the family's property will be inherited solely by Rita. You and Emma can go wherever you want. Just don't ever come back to the Bay family. Jack couldn't believe the scene before him. He knelt again at the hospital bedside. Dad, I'm your biological son too. If you disapprove of my relationship with Emma, I'll drive her away right now. Upon hearing that all the property was left to me, Jack panicked. He was even willing to sacrifice his sister, whom he had so obsessively protected. Emma steeled her heart and knelt before the hospital bed. Dad, I didn't mean to embarrass you. Brother forced me into this relationship. He made me move out as a threat to force you into buying a house. He taught me to frame Rita to gain sympathy. Emma shed 2 streams of crystal tears as she spoke, clearly outmaneuvering him. Jack could only glare at her in fury. Dad, I'm also part of the Bai family. I've lived here for over a decade. You can't just kick me out. I deserve a share of the family assets too. Seeing that his beloved sister was also trying to seize the family fortune, Jack's expression darkened. You have no blood ties to the Bai family whatsoever. On what grounds? Raising you for so long has already been an act of mercy. You don't deserve a single penny of the family fortune. He lost control while reprimanding Emma, just like he used to reprimand me. My father snapped sharply. You don't deserve it either. You projected the hatred from your previous life onto Rita, causing your biological sister to fall off the cliff. You hold no regard for blood relations in your heart. Upon hearing this, both Jack and I were stunned. It seemed that after my father suffered a severe head injury, he had regained memories from his past life. He knew that Jack had killed me. Seeing that all of his misdeeds were exposed, Jack decided to go all out and threaten our parents. Leaving the house empty-handed is impossible unless you give me a substantial sum. Only then will I even consider supporting your retirement. He stood up, gazing at me with contempt. This man is utterly unreliable. When you're old, you'll still end up relying on me. My dad directly dashed his hopes. Move out of the villa tonight, or I'll have the bodyguards carry you out. After harming your biological sister twice, how can I expect someone like you to take care of me in my old age? I should be thanking heaven if you didn't push me off the cliff. Jack's gaze gradually darkened. I was afraid he might do something unthinkable, so I held a thermos to shield my parents. I will take good care of Dad and Mom. I will never become an ungrateful wretch like you. Even though Jack was furious, he didn't dare to cause trouble in the hospital in broad daylight. He left the hospital room, throwing out the words, "You'll regret this." Emma didn't follow him. She continued kneeling on the ground, feigning pitifulness. Dad, Mom, look at me. I'm Emma. I'm your daughter. It was all my brother's idea to move out. I swear to cut off all ties with him. Please let me return to the Bai family. My mom uttered only a single word. Get out. Emma's schemes had long been seen through. Having been scarred by childhood poverty, she reckoned that since she couldn't inherit the family business, becoming a wealthy man's wife would be a decent alternative. She and Jack were birds of a feather. After they left, the whole world was finally at peace. My mom and I stayed in the hospital room. Luckily, Dad was recovering well. A week later, I picked up Dad, and we went home. Once, when Dad had too much to drink, he asked me if I hated Jack. Do you hate him for causing my death in the previous life? I shook my head. I believed that he truly loved Emma, just not as deeply. In Emma's presence, he was willing to abandon me. But when it came to the family fortune, he was willing to give up everything else. Jack was such a pragmatic person. 6 months later, I graduated from university and received an offer from a prestigious university abroad. I was torn between pursuing graduate studies abroad and inheriting the family business. My parents firmly supported my decision to go abroad, saying I had endured enough hardships in the first 20 years of my life. All they could do to make up for it was to fulfill all my wishes and allow me to do whatever I wished. My dad flexed his still powerful biceps. Dad can still manage the family business for you. It won't be too late for you to take over when you return after graduation. So, I chose to pursue graduate studies abroad. In the days leading up to my departure, I clung to my parents every moment like a shadow. Later, my parents took me to officially change my name, and for the first time I possessed a surname that truly belonged to me. Looking at the name Rita on my ID card, tears streamed down my face as I traced my fingers over the 3 characters again and again. My mom, heartbroken over the hardships I'd suffered, transferred the family's real estate assets to my name in advance. I refused to take it, but she said it was to sever Jack's ambitions. Jack was indeed causing trouble. He occasionally sent things our parents liked to the house, but they were all thrown out. Later, he would call occasionally, but the butler or nanny always hung up on him. Later, Jack began to harass me. He cursed me as a monster from birth who would harm others, saying he wished he had drowned me in the lake when I was 2 years old. Unfortunately, no matter how malicious his words were, They failed to evoke even the slightest emotion in me. The already minimal bond between us had completely disintegrated. After blocking Jack, I had a few peaceful days. But then, Emma started harassing me again. As soon as I picked up the call, weeping sounds immediately came through. "Rita, don't hang up. I beg you, help me." She had always been skilled at feigning pitifulness. I didn't hang up, but only to see which act of her performance this was. "Rita, I'm pregnant. I've been kicked out by Jack, and I don't have a single penny left. Can you help me?" She grew increasingly agitated, even bursting into tears. "Jack, that bastard, got fired and has been drinking at home, and he seized the house too. I truly have nowhere left to turn." I said, "Oh, then go to the police." With that, I hung up. Later, Emma still managed to reach my parents and disclosed her pregnancy. My parents, fearing she might harm herself, agreed to provide the couple with a sum of money on the condition that they live a stable life and raise their child. Jack agreed. On the wedding day, none of the three of us attended. We all knew in our hearts that Jack had only agreed to the marriage for the money. Less than a month after their wedding, Emma suffered a miscarriage. Jack probably saw the child as a burden or was simply driven by his animalistic instincts. After drinking too much, he beat Emma until she miscarried. As a result, he was sent to jail for rehabilitation. My parents did not step in to assist him and devoted themselves entirely to me. Every item I needed for my study abroad was meticulously chosen by them. The night before my departure, I suddenly had a change of heart. "Dad, Mom, maybe I shouldn't go after all. Although it's competitive here domestically, I could still take the entrance exams." My mom's index finger tapped my forehead, the most potent East Asian parenting tactic. "None of that nonsense. You're going because you're exceptional. You must seize this opportunity." My dad also smiled as he stood by my side. "If you miss home, come back anytime. It's not like we can't afford plane tickets." Even though they said that, the heartfelt reluctance to leave still tormented me. Early the next morning, I had a good cry under the covers. My eyes remained red and swollen. At the security checkpoint, I hugged my parents goodbye. "Don't stay up late, avoid junk food, and take your medication on schedule." My father nodded. My mom patted me on the shoulder. "Safe travels." As I walked away, glancing back every few steps, I glimpsed Rita from my past life waving through the crowd in my dazed state. Her lips moved as if to say, "This time, you must be fiercely happy." I nodded and vowed silently in my heart, "I will."